we are, by most measures, the leading university in the world on the topics of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. We were the first to offer a degree program. We were the first to offer a course. We were the first to publish diplomas on the blockchain. We were the first to accept Bitcoin for tuition. Our student community, which includes the students who took our first course, which is a free MOOC offered on this topic, taught by me and Andreas Antonopoulos, is now something like 30,000 students. So we certainly have the largest academic and student community in this field. I was at Consensus less than a week ago, and every 20th person had somehow gone through one of our programs. And so it's a great team, it's a great group of students, it's a great community. And what I'd like to talk about is, why does this matter? What's important? Why are we interested in it as a university? Why are we interested in it from a academic perspective? Why are we interested in it from an interdisciplinary perspective? What's the fundamental there that's there? And for me, it's the following. I'd like you to think about how you interact with your life and society on a day-to-day basis. And when you do that, you realize your society is intermediated by a variety of economic, usage, and political rights. Economic, usage, and political rights. So what's an economic right? I might have a demand deposit at the Bank of Cyprus, and if I go there most years and ask for my money, I will get it. Some years I might not get it, but usually I'll get it. A usage right is, today IFX Expo has the right to use this room. A week from now, they won't. A political right. Some of you here might have the right to vote in the municipal elections of Limassol. And so on, right? Like who's enrolled in a course at the university, who's staying in a hotel tonight, who owns shares of Bank of Cyprus, who can serve on the board of Bank of Cyprus, who can vote for the board members of the Bank of Cyprus. Everything is some set of rights that make modern society work. There's no version of complex society that works without them. And without exception, until 2009, all of those rights were intermediated with a ledger, with a list of people and what rights they have that was managed by a centralized TTP, or trusted third party. So in the case of the Bank of Cyprus, the trusted third party who can confirm or deny if I can withdraw 100 euros from an ATM is the Bank of Cyprus and, in fact, their banking ERP system. In the case of the convention center here, there is some reservation database that says today IFX Expo has this room. In the case of the municipal elections, it's the government of Cyprus, the municipality of Cyprus, that keeps those records. And in all cases, you're entrusting someone or some entity or some procedure to say you're allowed to have this right, or you're not allowed to have this right, or you can transfer it, or it can be modified, or it was given to you in error, or it can be suspended. And this is so deeply embedded in our view of how things operate, we don't even think about it. Honestly, I don't think about it. Despite the fact that I've spent the last 5 years thinking about decentralization, we run a whole initiative called decentralization. If the library calls me and says, we need a new system for checking out the books, I'm going to think to myself, right, well, let's buy a database. And they're going to say, who's the database administrator? And it's going to be Bob, and we're going to trust that Bob is going to make sure that you have the right to take this book out or not take this book out, because generally it works okay as far as we can tell, right? Well, what was important about Bitcoin, and for all it's the blockchain, it's not the cryptocurrency, the reality is there is no concept here without Bitcoin having gone first. They were the ones that thought through the system. They were the ones that had the first system that actually worked, and everything else is some derivative from there. And what Bitcoin sorted out was, how can a set of people who don't know each other, who don't trust each other, who have not put someone in charge, agree on a sequence of events, which sounds like a narrow thing that was done, but it actually solves a long-standing problem in distributed systems in computer science called the Byzantine generals problem, which is how can a series of generals that don't know each other, trust each other, technically, how do they know when to attack Constantinople? How do they know that they've agreed on a sequence of events? And it turns out this is a very, very big deal. Now, what's the sequence of events that you're agreeing on in Bitcoin? You're agreeing on where is each Bitcoin at each point in time. If I've moved it to Nick, and then Nick has moved it over to Georgina, that sequence of events, if Nick goes to move his non-existent Bitcoin to Georgina, because I haven't sent it to him yet, we're out of the sequence of events, the system will not let Nick move a Bitcoin to Georgina. Now, still doesn't sound very interesting. Let's think about it this way. Bitcoin effectively is a bank, right? It is doing the payment functions and the roughly checking account functions of a bank, and it is a bank with nobody in charge. If I said Bank of Cyprus was going to leave its database open, anyone can go in there and without authenticating with anyone in the Bank of Cyprus, make transactions, how much confidence would you have that transactions would end up where they need to be? In fact, what you might think is it's going to be a free-for-all. Like, I'll go try and take Nick's money before he tries and takes my money, and pretty soon we're in complete chaos. Here you have a system for the last 9 years, keeps the money in the right place, sends it to the right place, organizes it correctly and without error, without anyone being in charge. And so then when you think and so was the first implementation. It was an implementation, let's call it commodity money, let's call it a payment network, let's call it a bank account. But that same system applies in all types of things. OpenBazaar is an eBay without an eBay. Ethereum is a smart contract without a server to run it. And basically, the 50,000-foot point of view, what's important between now and 2035 is, at least in theory, any one of these thousands of ledgers that intermediate our lives can actually be implemented in a decentralized manner. And now, still, okay, well, why does that matter? Right? On a day-to-day basis, honestly, centralized ledgers work fine. And so here we have to reason by analogy. We have to look at properties that emerge through decentralization and then think what that might actually mean. There's a great analogy for this, which is the internet. So before the internet, media was effectively centralized. So if you wanted to get your work into print, into a book, you went through a book editor. Into a magazine, you went through a magazine editor. Into a newspaper, you went through a newspaper editor. On the radio, you went through who was ever the producer on the radio. Same with TV. There was a trusted third party that said, this is acceptable communication, and this is the way you can communicate at scale. And what the internet said, well, you know, we're not going to have a central party. We're going to have a decentralized, permissionless, and censorship-resistant system. And so these two factors are very important because we had them in the internet and we have them with Bitcoin, and they are the key to this whole affair. And we should talk a little bit about what they are because they're similar but different. Permissionless means I can connect to the internet, offer a product or service, and I don't have to go to someone, to the editor of the internet, and say, can I do this? And I know this sounds very silly now, but in the early 90s, I remember a New York Times editorial that said, well, who's going to be the editor for the internet? Everyone's just going to write whatever they want? And it turns out, yes, in fact, everyone's going to write whatever they want, and most of the time it's okay. Once in a while we have some strange outcomes because of that, but generally it's okay. And the interesting part about the permissionlessness is not that you're now running an online magazine. These are the types of things that happen when a new technology first emerges. People implement the old applications of the old technology, the new technology. So the first phase of the internet was, it's a newspaper, but it's online. It's a magazine, but it's online. It took 10, 15, 20 years before someone said, oh, it's Twitter. We're just going to put 140 characters online. And it sounds dumb and silly, and like, who cares what someone had for lunch as a ham sandwich in San Francisco? And 10 years later, world leaders are making all their main policy statements on Twitter. You have Airbnb. Airbnb requires every piece of the technology that makes up the internet, but is a conceptual leap that having a stranger come and rent your sofa is feasible and possible, and you can manage it at scale with ratings, which honestly sounds crazy and sounded crazy to me when I first saw it, because I'm a little too old by the time Airbnb came out. And Airbnb would have no way, no how gotten through a centralized committee of what applications we should have through the internet. If you had gone to that committee, which would be a bunch of 40, 50, and 60-year-olds, and said, we're going to have a system where we'll let random strangers sleep on our couch, everyone will say, oh, no, that's very risky. People are going to get murdered. There's going to be property damage. Compliance will never sign off. Legal will never sign off. And there'll be no Airbnb. The reason there's an Airbnb, the reason there's a Twitter, the reason there is a Wikipedia, the reason there's a WikiLeaks is because it is permissionless. You can come in, you don't have to say, convince someone that this is a good idea, and you can be anywhere in the world and build an application for it. It's bucket one. Bucket two is censorship resistant. Now, what does censorship resistant mean? It means you, in the context of Bitcoin, you cannot stop, there is no party that can stop a transaction from going from one place to another. One of the great misnomers in Bitcoin are the miners, because it puts people in the wrong frame of reference. They think they're going out and discovering Bitcoins, like Bitcoins are hard to find. That's not what they're doing. The miners are the bookkeepers, and when they're mining, they're competing in a lottery to put the next set of transactions in the system, and by competing in that lottery, when they win it, they get a prize of some Bitcoins. They haven't discovered them, they were created all along, and they have the ability to put the next set of transactions in the system. Why is that important? It's important because you can't then go and collude with the bookkeepers, with the administrator of the database, with the trusted third party and say, look, I don't like what Georgina's spending her money on. I saw that she donated last week to WikiLeaks. I'm against WikiLeaks. When this happened several years ago with Visa and MasterCard, the US government was getting irritated at WikiLeaks, for better or for worse. I'm not judging whether they should have been irritated or not. And they called Visa and MasterCard and said, cut them off the credit card network. And because Visa and MasterCard, you know who you can find. There's a CEO there, and he's running a company, and the company has billions of dollars of value, and he doesn't want to violate the law, or he doesn't want the stock price to drop, or he doesn't want to end up in jail. When the federal government says, please stop doing this, he will stop doing this. And you might say, well, I don't care about political speech. Sure, but Nigeria, the whole country is cut off of PayPal because chargebacks are so high that it's easier for PayPal to say, we will accept no merchants in Nigeria than actually have to deal with that. And while there might be some type of fraud or inappropriate chargebacks in Nigeria, is it really sensible to say to 160 people, 160 million people in Nigeria, none of you can conduct commerce online? And so on and so on. So when you combine these two properties, the most interesting thing about Bitcoin, and then any other cryptocurrency, and then any other of these open blockchain systems, is we know when you have open, permissionless, censorship-resistant systems, all types of gigantic amount of innovation eventually comes to play. Because you're now letting the whole world at large, or at least the whole internet-connected world, which soon enough will be the whole world, and say, whatever you can think of, whatever good, bad, dumb, stupid, great idea you have, try it. And we have seen that even though the original concept for the internet was media, basically, of course it's subsumed the media industry and subsumed all types of other things that people were able to invent once they were able to move information globally, permissionless, censorship resistant. So this is the same thing for money, for value, for commerce, for anything that has value. And that is a very, 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 very big idea. Arguably, things with value in aggregate are worth more than information. I don't know. It's hard to actually get a handle on that. Certainly all the information in the world is a very valuable asset, but certainly all the things in the world that have value is also going to be a very valuable asset. What have we seen so far? Well, we're still in the beginning phase. We're still mostly in the let's copy the old system into the new system phase. So what's Bitcoin today? The closest analogy, I think, to what Bitcoin is today. Does anyone here know what an RTGS is? So an RTGS is a real-time gross settlement system. In the United States, it's called Fedwire. In the Eurozone, it's called Target 2. Every currency zone has it. It's the ultimate clearing system, clearing and settlement system for financial institutions. When you're using a credit card, you are not using the underlying payment infrastructure of a country. You're in a layer 2 or layer 3 network, an agreement between vendors and merchants, and ultimately the payments come through several days later between big financial institutions in an irreversible one-way system. Bitcoin is a global RTGS running 24/7, 365 around the world, open to anyone. You cannot go get access to Fedwire as a consumer, as a regular company. You can get access to the Bitcoin network anywhere you have internet access without asking anyone, and on a purely software basis at the exciting cost of free. So you can download a piece of software, put it into your piece of software. You've now embedded the functions of a real-time gross settlement system into your piece of software, whether your piece of software is some type of financial-oriented software, or it is, in the future, a drone, a solar charger, a drone that is flying to the solar charger and paying for solar energy and electricity that came from the solar energy. Anywhere you have software-based systems, you can insert effectively a bank and a real-time gross settlement system. There's hints of other things. Hints. Bitcoin's the best of size. Where do you see the hints? I mentioned OpenBazaar. OpenBazaar, you run a piece of client software on your computer. It connects through a similar type of concept to other people's software, and it creates a set of stores. It creates an eBay-like site, and you can transact with each other, but there's no one in the middle. There's no one that can say, you can't sell this, or I'm going to take a commission, or these are the rules by which we're running our commerce site. It's a peer-to-peer open commerce site. There's even interesting ones that are not pure. They're not purely technical in nature. And in terms of examples, I'll leave you guys with this. It might be the most relevant to this room. There is a hedge fund called Numerai. It was founded in 2005. Most likely, if you're running a modern competitive hedge fund, you need data scientists. Most likely, if you started in 2015 running a hedge fund, you can't afford data scientists, or you can't afford a lot of data scientists because Goldman Sachs has already hired them. So what did they do? They said, well, do we need data scientists? What we actually need is data science analysis. And so they took the data they needed analyzed, they encrypted it, but kept the relationships together, and they placed it online and said, anyone who wants to predict what comes next can make a prediction, and we will reward you with our token. And as the community got more developed and the token picked up value relative to Bitcoin, then they said, you can also stake your token behind your predictions if you believe in them more. And they now have 30,000 data scientists, except nobody knows if they're data scientists, if they're formally data scientists, if they're some professor at a French university, if they're a brilliant kid in Mongolia. They have 30,000 people working for them, making predictions and helping them run their hedge fund. This type of thing is literally impossible operationally in the traditional world. If I went to the HR department of the University of Nicosia and said, over the next 3 years, I'd like to hire 30,000 people, they're going to be all over the world, I want to pay them on a completely performance-based model, and their payments are going to be anything from $100,000 to 10 cents, depending on how they do. Can you please do that for me? They'd escort me out of the building. And yet, this little company with a handful of employees and not a fraction of the administrative infrastructure of the University of Nicosia is able to support this ecosystem because, once again, you have a blockchain that is allowing people to collaborate even though they don't know each other, they don't trust each other. They literally, they don't know each other. And yet they're running one part of a hedge fund's function together. Just like Team Bitcoin, which is a bunch of people that also don't know each other, are running a global bank and payment network. And just like Team Ethereum is running a global kind of smart contract processing platform. And so at the end of it, and it's always my advice to people who are involved in the space technically, the really interesting thing is how this enables people to organize themselves in new and different ways, right? So at some level, Numerize starting to get towards a second generation idea, right? They're just the same way Wikipedia is a second generation idea, right? Writing an encyclopedia collaboratively before the internet was actually impossible, right? So it is a way to organize people to do things that weren't capable of being done before. It is a way to go from companies and organizations to markets and networks. And it is a way, very, very broadly speaking, to move to a world with, I think, on average, greater freedom. Because there are going to be blockchains for good and blockchains for evil, certainly. But to the degree you can actually, you do not have those centralized third parties, but you have networks of people collaborating together, on the whole, those should be more open and more free systems. So that's why we're excited about this. Price of Bitcoin goes up and down. Thousands of cryptocurrencies are launched. All types of enterprise blockchain projects are launched. Some of them are going to work. Most of them are not going to work. 25 years from now, it's all going to look very different than it is today. But the thing we're absolutely certain, this is a huge concept. It is a very big deal. We're going to be spending a lot of time of it at the university, and it is going to be one of the great developments and innovations of our lifetimes. Thank you very much, everyone. I don't know if we have time for questions. What do we do? Okay. Do we have any questions?
So one of the exciting things that we are expecting from blockchain is when governments are going to put their data on the blockchain. So you're going to have citizens who have to pay their tax because most transactions will be using the government blockchain. How do you see the issue of transparency being an issue, like having someone's transactions being on every transaction being on a ledger has both good and bad things. Like from one side, you eliminate crime because they can't do money laundering if everything is on a public ledger that they have to use their money. And on the other side, everything is public and there's people that you want to have privacy and all this.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And it's actually, you have two separate parts of the question. The question on privacy versus transparency, there's no right answer, and there's no fixed answer by virtue of using a blockchain. So there are different blockchains that give you different levels of privacy versus transparency assurances. There are blockchains that are almost wholly open. There are blockchains that are pseudonymous, like Bitcoin. There are blockchains like Monero and Zcash that are aiming to be private. It's still one of the big outstanding topics in blockchains. How do you assure privacy? And what's the right blockchain for a certain purpose? And how much privacy assurance versus transparency assurance you want to give? I think it's a slider, and you're going to go left to right. Your second question is this relevant to government? It is hugely relevant to government, and it's going to be a great usage case for government because governments are expected, on the whole, to be more transparent than businesses and individuals. And so you generally have a lower expectation of privacy about things like who's running your land registry and who voted in a certain election and how your municipal budget was spent. And so I think in time, it'll be a great usage case for government. It will make them more open and transparent. People will see what government functions are happening in real time. And it will get there. It's just going to be slow because governments usually, with a couple of exceptions, are not known for being early adopters of technology. But eventually they'll get there, and I think it's going to be a very good fit for them.
Thank you.
You mentioned the Numerai hedge fund.
Yep.
What is the, is that NUMERI? Just to look
It
it up?
is
Or?
NUMER.AI. They also have some kind of wild ideas that don't make any sense to me, that they're going to just end up being the one hedge fund in the world,
Right.
which doesn't make any sense because then they'll just be trading against themselves and they're not necessarily going to make any money. That part I don't necessarily agree with. The part that I think, it's not clear to me that they are investing any better than any other hedge funds. What is for sure the case with Numerai is they have done a significant innovation in HR management. Right? To me, the interesting part is, how do you get 30,000 people working for a very small company without having huge resources? And they solved that, roughly speaking, with a blockchain, and I think using Bitcoin as their ultimate payout mechanism.
Great. I've got a question about the regulatory aspects of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And I'm wondering whether the trend is going to be to try and classify this industry in terms of the existing regulatory frameworks, or if there will have to be a whole new set of chapters written for in the various jurisdictions to handle blockchain and cryptocurrencies.
So the answer to your question is both. Take the US that has, in many ways, a reasonably developed approach to this.
Which, sorry?
The United States has a reasonably developed approach to this. Basically, every agency is looking at, and this is primarily relating to the public cryptocurrencies, like Bitcoin, they're looking at them and saying, oh, yeah, I should be in charge of this. So the IRS says cryptocurrency is real property and you should pay capital gains or losses on your purchases and sales. Okay, reasonable enough. The CFTC says it's a commodity and trading of Bitcoin should be covered by commodities legislation. So if you want to buy a Bitcoin future, it's going to be like buying a pork belly future, and the CFTC should be the relevant regulator. The Securities and Exchange Commission has looked at it and said, oh, some initial coin offerings are actually securities offerings, and so we should regulate them as security offerings. FinCEN, which is another financial regulator, has said some usages of this technology, and certainly the exchanges that exchange from sovereign currency, dollars, to cryptocurrency, are money transmitters and need to be regulated by money transmitter type regulation that exists both at the federal and the state level. So one of the funniest things to me is like when you see nonstop articles in the media says, oh, these unregulated cryptocurrencies. I mean, that's close. In a long string of things that you read in the media that's wrong about cryptocurrencies, that's near the top of the list. If anything, everyone regulates them. You know, there's no other topic where you say, like, yes, this is a security. Like someone issues shares of IBM, and someone else says, yeah, but it's also a commodity, and oh, yeah, it's also a money transmitter, because it's a little bit of all these things. It doesn't, so right now, because everyone looks at it and says, it's my type of thing, they want to regulate it. And in time, I think we will have to evolve to some smarter frameworks to wrap around it. But I don't think anyone has it right yet.
So we're missing clarity until further notice. Have we got time for
Yeah, of course.
Is anyone else? Yeah. I was just wondering if you could comment on the success factors that are emerging for cryptocurrencies, not so much in terms of the returns that we've seen with Bitcoin, but as far as the establishment of a cryptocurrency to be common currency and established in the global marketplace.
Well, I mean, it depends what the metric is, right? There's by any volume metric, I think by virtue of it being the oldest, Bitcoin has the most transaction volume, the most volume in US dollar terms, the most mining security applied to it. That might change in the future, but that's for sure the case today. And it kind of tapers off. There's, 10 big ones, and then it starts tapering off. That's the currencies themselves. There have been the firms that have been most successful as firms in the space have been the exchanges. So the largest exchange in the United States, Coinbase, was a 5-year-old company in 2017 and generated $1 billion of EBITDA, which has to be the fastest growing company to $1 billion of EBITDA in world history ever, anywhere. And it's interesting because that's a centralized model of a old approach. There's nothing new about having an exchange between dollars and some financial asset, and there's nothing in the least bit decentralized about Coinbase, but it's a service provider to a fast-growing industry and has done very, very well. The more exotic cryptocurrencies and the more advanced usage cases, on the whole, have small volume yet, and most of them will fail. Someone will eventually figure out what the key features, functionality, usage cases should be, but we're a ways away. We're still at the early internet phase for when people are throwing a lot of things at the wall to see what is the right way to do it.
Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone.